Welcome back to another video on Dissatisfied Philosophy. Today I'm going to be offering a short response to Dr. Stephen Boyce, who recently did a interview with my friend Swan Sana on his channel Intellectual Catholicism on Origen, basically the question of redeeming Origen. What are the condemnations of Origen, this and that, and for um, much of the interview, Stephen responded to a comment and then a post that I made on Facebook. Um, he made a post on Origin first, and I sort of offered a quick critique, what I thought was maybe a more balanced overview of Origin's reception in church history. And then, so this is now, and then Stephen offered a quick response to me, and now this is more of a drawn out response, and as well a introduction to the reasons to redeem Origin to people that probably have not thought about this topic in much depth. So, before I give my bit of a response, which I did post in the comment section as well, I want to just thank Stephen for being very even-handed with engaging with what I said. You know, it wasn't a lot. It was just like a paragraph, but I really like he knows this topic really well, and it's really good to see because not a lot of people know the history of the condemnations, the quote unquote Origenist condemnations, the first Origenist controversy, second Origenist controversy, and then finally the big one at Constantinople II, the Fifth Ecumenical Council, right? And it's really great to see people being interested in this topic. It drew me in. I mean, I did my undergrad thesis on this. Obviously, Chapter 10 of Grace Abounds is on the topic of Origen's reception at ecumenical councils. And I'd love to talk to Stephen, especially on Origen's later reception, because I think that he'd be interested in what I have to say on the Sixth Council and then as well the Seventh Council. Um, and then I believe maybe there's some other stuff in the Catholic world, but then I can talk about maybe remnants of Origen's condemnation at the 1672 Council of Jerusalem for the Pan-Orthodox Council of Jerusalem. But so I want to preface my responses with that point, that just thanking Stephen to be very even-handed and as well introducing people to this topic. So with that said, I'm going to be this is a very technical response in the sense that you have to know a lot about this topic to really get this response, right? So if you don't, that's totally fine. I would highly recommend you to watch the video, watch the interview with Stephen, and read Chapter 10 of Grace Abounds. So I'll read the whole thing. Hey Stephen, I really appreciate you taking the time to engage with my comment/post on Facebook. I really hope your discussion I really hope your discussion with Swan has opened more Catholics up to Origen and his theology. Still, I wish to respond to a couple of points. Consider this an in-house debate between two people who disagree on historical rather than theological matters regarding Origen. First, although you are correct that the letter of Pope Anastasius, this was written in 401, does not explicitly condemn Origen or his doctrines in writing, its contents seem to suggest that the good Pope implied a condemnation of both. I write in Grace Abounds, quote, Anastasius did not specify what doctrines were condemned, but he mentioned the Synod of Alexandria, which points to the sense that he agreed with the condemnation that Theophilus issued, unquote. This is on page 233 to 234. I then note that Anastasius criticized Origen for, quote, this is Anastasius's words, complicated arguments that betray the apostolic faith, unquote. Hence, I struggle to see weight in your suggestion that Anastasius, 1, did not condemn Origen and 2, did not condemn his writings. In my view, he did not distinguish 1 from 2, nor did he distinguish in the case of his writings that X argument is, quote, apostolic per se, but X argument is heretical. As far as we can tell, Anastasius criticized Origen wholesale because he argued things that betrayed the apostolic faith. To take the words of the Pope himself, quote, this is the words of Anastasius, his Origen's aim or object was to disintegrate our faith, which is that of the apostles. So, I conclude let me say that again. To take the words of the Pope himself, quote, His Origen's object was to disintegrate our faith, which is that of the apostles, unquote. So, the papal statement certainly remains relevant for tracing the timeline of Origen's condemnations leading to Constantinople II. My second point. I discussed the Council of Nitria / Alexandria in the post because, according to Canon 1 of the Council of Chalcedon, all decisions of local and ecumenical councils remain in force. I argue that this ideal sense of ecclesial procedure is relevant when tracing the timeline of Origen's condemnations leading up to Constantinople II. I write in Grace Abounds, quote, a prior condemnation of a figure and or their writings in a local council may not indicate that a later ecumenical council will subscribe to all the decisions involved in their condemnation, but it does indicate that there is an expectation that the later council will examine the decrees of the local council, and this may influence their own decisions to some degree. This is on page 234. This point, in fact, leads me to disagree with Illyria Romelli's claim that Origen's name was an interpolation in Canon 11 of Constantinople II. Later in the interview, you mentioned your approval of her claim. I would like to hear more of your reasoning because, as I say on the same page before the quote above, quote, since Origen, at least in name, was condemned in Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Cyprus, and even by a sitting pope, it's fair to argue this condemnation was quasi-authoritative for the church and later councils, unquote. Add to that now Canon 1 of Chalcedon, which demonstrates that looking toward past local and ecumenical decisions was usual practice. The councilman in 553 writing Origen's name in Canon 11 is, well, a fair suggestion that makes the most sense of the extant evidence available from the Latin Acts and the often unreliable but not to be dismissed witness of Cyril of Scythopolis in 558, that is, 5 years after the council. Now, none of this means that Origen's theology itself, nor the spurious 15 anathemas, were at all discussed at the council. See Grace Abounds, pages 215 to 16, for my response to Father Richard Price, who recently changed his position on the topic outside of his published work. This was communicated to me by email that is shared with his permission. To use Stephen's words in minute 53, Canon 11, in effect, condemns, quote, the living men, that is the Isochrist, the 6th century Palestinian monastic group that was being attacked and condemned and criticized in the council, even if, in my view, the councilmen did historically believe that Origen taught these things, due to anti-Origenist propaganda, such as the popular treatise of Antipatris of Bostra. See pages 223 to 227 on this development of the Isochrist and what Antipatris of Bostra and the propaganda around Origenism in general in the 6th century. Regarding Origen as a person, then, I would say that Canon 11 can only tell us that Origen was condemned by name. Nothing more, nothing less. Last point, and whatever one makes of this decision theologically probably rises and falls on whether historical errors are permitted in one's view of ecumenical decisions. They certainly are for mine, so I have no issue with the condemnation in Canon 11 of Origen personally. So I simply read out the YouTube comment that I made under the video to show my audience this. And so I want to thank Stephen for engaging me in this fun little in-house debate. And I would love, like I say here, would love to hear his reasoning on why he trusts Romelli and why he thinks that her argument is persuasive and my points are unpersuasive. As well, I would love to discuss the later condemnations of Origen, as that is something that is really, really not discussed. Like, very rarely, right? In the 6th and the 7th Ecumenical Council. So, anyway, have a nice night, and subscribe down below, like the video. Have a nice day.